It started with a headline that sent shockwaves through both diplomatic circles and pharmaceutical boardrooms: Trump slaps 200% tariff on Canadian drug imports. The announcement came early Monday morning out of Washington. President Donald Trump, now the GOP frontrunner for the 2028 election, taking to Truth Social to justify the move as a defense of American medicine. The 200% tariff, aimed squarely at prescription drugs imported from Canada, immediately raised alarms in Ottawa. For decades, Canadians have benefited from lower drug prices due to strict regulations and government negotiations with pharmaceutical companies. American consumers, frustrated by their own inflated prices, have increasingly turned to Canadian pharmacies, legally and illegally, to fill prescriptions they simply can't afford at home. Trump's move, framed as a blow against foreign freeloading, was widely seen as a campaign play to energize his populist base. But this time, Ottawa didn't stay silent. Prime Minister Mark Carney, known more for his calm financial intellect than fiery rhetoric, surprised many with the tone of his first public response. Standing before reporters outside Rideau Cottage, Carney didn't mince words. "This is not a trade policy," he said firmly. "It's economic coercion. And Canada will respond as any sovereign nation would, calmly but decisively." The remark marked a shift. In the past, Canadian leaders might have waited weeks to craft a response behind closed doors. But Carney's decision to respond within hours signaled that this wasn't just about medicine, it was about sovereignty. It was about whether Canada would allow a U.S. presidential candidate to dictate its export policy through sheer bombast. Behind the scenes, tensions were already mounting. Health Canada officials scrambled to calculate the economic fallout. The pharmaceutical industry warned that Canadian supply chains, already strained post-pandemic, could buckle under retaliatory pressure. Provincial leaders, especially in border provinces like Ontario and Quebec, called for immediate federal action. Meanwhile, Washington appeared caught off guard by the blowback. While Trump had expected pushback from Liberal commentators, few in his circle predicted that Canada's PM would come out swinging with such clarity and force. What would Carney do next? Would this escalate into a full-blown trade confrontation? Or was this the opening move in a larger geopolitical chess match? Canada was preparing to make its next move. In the hours following his bold public statement, Prime Minister Mark Carney retreated into the thick walls of the West Bloc, not to hide, but to plan. Behind closed doors, a series of high-stakes meetings unfolded between federal ministers, trade advisors, and pharmaceutical executives. The question on the table was simple, but its implications were massive. How should Canada respond to a 200% tariff without triggering a full-scale trade war? Carney, a former central banker with a reputation for measured decision-making, understood the stakes better than most. He had served at the highest levels of global finance and knew how fragile supply chains were, especially in healthcare. But he also understood political pressure. With headlines blazing across every national outlet, opposition parties calling for real consequences, and provincial premiers demanding clarity, Carney couldn't afford to look passive. That afternoon, in a secure cabinet meeting room, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland reportedly laid out a retaliatory tariff framework that could be activated within 72 hours. The plan targeted a carefully selected range of American goods, pharmaceuticals, agricultural exports, and even defense-related materials. "We need to speak in a language Washington understands," she said, according to a source in the room. Trade pressure. But Carney wasn't rushing toward escalation. Instead, he asked for one more round of consultations, with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, provincial health ministers, and the parliamentary budget officer. His goal was clear: craft a response that was not just tough, but strategic, one that wouldn't backfire on Canadian patients or taxpayers. Meanwhile, the tone in U.S. media began to shift. CNN and MSNBC ran segments titled, "Trump's Pharma Tariff, Policy or Punishment." Even traditionally conservative voices on Fox News questioned whether the tariff would actually lower drug prices in the U.S., or just create supply shortages. Back in Ottawa, Carney emerged briefly to speak to the press. "We will not be drawn into reactionary politics," he said. "But let me be clear, Canada's healthcare system is not a bargaining chip. And Canadians will not be punished for the campaign slogans of another country's politician." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The message was unmistakable: Canada would protect its interests, not with rage, but with resolve. And by the next morning, the world would see what that resolve looked like in practice. At 9 a.m. the next morning, Canada's response became official. Standing before a podium adorned with both the maple leaf and the emblem of Global Affairs Canada, Trade Minister Melanie Joly laid out the details. Effective immediately, Canada would be imposing a tiered tariff structure on a selection of high-revenue American exports, specifically targeting pharmaceutical manufacturing components, agricultural equipment, and bulk raw materials that were heavily used by U.S.-based companies. What caught analysts off guard wasn't just the speed of the response, but its precision. This wasn't a blanket tariff. It was surgical, designed to hit sectors with strong political lobbies in Washington. Midwestern farm equipment, Texan chemical exports, Florida-based drug packaging. These were not just economic sectors, they were electoral battlegrounds. Our message is simple, Joly said. Canada is not the aggressor here. But if you try to destabilize our healthcare economy, you will find that the cost of provocation is real. It was a warning dressed as policy, and the impact was immediate. U.S. pharmaceutical lobbyists began ringing alarm bells on Capitol Hill. Several Republican senators, already uneasy with Trump's aggressive trade talk, began distancing themselves from the tariff. Senator Lisa McBride of Pennsylvania, where a major drug packaging plant depended on Canadian imports, said in a televised interview, "This isn't strength. This is sabotage." Meanwhile, Mark Carney remained composed but visible. He conducted a series of interviews with Canadian media, carefully choosing his tone, never attacking Trump by name, but consistently framing the issue as one of health sovereignty. In a sit-down with CBC's The National, Carney remarked, "A functioning democracy doesn't let a foreign politician decide who gets affordable insulin." That line, short, powerful, and human, began trending on social media. It wasn't just about tariffs anymore. It was about the deeper question of whether healthcare access could be used as a bargaining chip in international politics. In Washington, Trump's team appeared rattled. A scheduled press event about his economic plan was delayed. Later, in a hastily arranged appearance outside Mar-a-Lago, Trump doubled down, "Canada's been leeching off our system for years. I'm just doing what every president should have done decades ago." But behind the bravado, it was clear Trump hadn't expected a coordinated, calculated Canadian response. And this wasn't the end. Because while tariffs had made headlines, Carney was preparing for something bigger. Within 48 hours of the tariff war's ignition, Prime Minister Mark Carney shifted gears from national retaliation to global positioning. He wasn't just responding to Trump anymore, he was building an international case against him. Carney's team quietly arranged a video conference with the Prime Ministers of Australia, the UK, and New Zealand, along with EU Commission officials, to discuss coordinated responses to unilateral pharmaceutical aggression, as one diplomat phrased it. Though the language sounded diplomatic, the intent was clear. Trump's tariff wasn't just a Canada problem, it was a global precedent no one wanted to see take root. At the virtual summit, Carney presented a dossier compiled by Canada's Ministry of Health and Global Affairs. It included charts showing how Trump's tariff would disrupt international drug pricing, delay treatments in multiple countries, and threaten collaborative research programs on cancer and rare diseases. More importantly, it highlighted how a single presidential order, issued during a campaign, had instantly destabilized billions in supply chain agreements across allied nations. By the end of the session, several leaders had agreed to jointly denounce the tariff policy. Australia's Prime Minister called it reckless economic bullying. The EU issued a formal statement of concern. And quietly, France proposed opening a WTO complaint, with Canada's backing. Meanwhile, Carney used the momentum at home. Standing before the House of Commons, he introduced a resolution titled the Canadian Health Sovereignty Act, aimed at securing long-term pharmaceutical independence. It called for federal investment into domestic drug manufacturing, cross-border research protections, and new subsidies for Canadian patients who might be affected by drug price spikes. The bill received applause from across the political spectrum, a rare sight in today's polarized climate. Carney's real brilliance, however, lay in messaging. He never once descended into name-calling. He didn't brand Trump as a lunatic or a bully. Instead, he painted Canada as the adult in the room, principled, clear-eyed, and unwilling to be pushed around. This tone resonated far beyond Ottawa. Canadian allies began to see Carney not just as a national leader, but as a stabilizing international statesman, someone who could stand up to American chaos without triggering collapse. In contrast, Trump's media appearances grew more erratic. On a call-in interview with Newsmax, he ranted about globalists conspiring with Trudeau's banker friend, referring to Carney. The irony. Every outburst only reinforced Carney's calm image. But with both leaders digging in, the final confrontation was now inevitable. The stage was set. After a week of escalating rhetoric, economic countermeasures, and growing international attention, Prime Minister Mark Carney made one final move that would seal Canada's position and send a direct signal to Washington. Carney took the floor in the House of Commons for a rare national address, broadcast live across all major networks. Unlike his usual composed press briefings, this was a direct message, not just to Canadians, but to Donald Trump himself. Standing at the podium, his voice measured and steady, Carney began. Canada does not seek conflict. We value our relationship with the United States, built over generations of trade, cooperation, and shared sacrifice. But we cannot and will not accept economic coercion disguised as campaign theater. He paused, letting the words settle. If the price of protecting Canadian patients is a fight, then let the world know, we will fight not with rage, but with resolve. We will fight with unity, with facts, and with allies. And we will win, not just for ourselves, but for every democracy that refuses to be intimidated by political vanity. In that moment, the political became personal. Carney, often accused of being too technocratic, spoke directly to families across Canada. He referenced real patients, seniors in Nova Scotia waiting for heart medication, a mother in Manitoba worried about insulin costs. He made it human. But then came the line that would be quoted around the world. No foreign leader, past, present, or future, gets to weaponize a child's cancer treatment for applause. Within minutes, the clip was viral. Even in the US, it struck a nerve. CNN called it the most principled rebuke of Trump's trade rhetoric in years. The New York Times ran an op-ed titled, "Canada just gave America a lesson in leadership." In response, Trump fired off 3 posts on Truth Social, accusing Carney of grandstanding and warning of more tariffs to come. But this time, the world didn't react with fear. Instead, the backlash shifted toward Trump himself. U.S. consumer groups, already under pressure from high drug prices, began calling the tariff cruel and self-defeating. Back in Ottawa, Carney didn't celebrate. He simply returned to work, continuing to push forward the Health Sovereignty Act and overseeing new bilateral talks with the EU. Because for him, this was never about Trump. It was about showing Canadians, and the world, that in the face of political theater, real leadership still matters. Subscribe to Maple Flash for more updates.